Good morning. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Risk and Assurance Committee meeting. I'm going to ask Councillor O'Brien to open our meeting with a karakia. Meeting notices, just live streaming, just to remind everybody that council and standing committee meetings are live streamed, and that's on the council's website and YouTube channel. Public gallery, we have, yes, hello, a member in the public gallery, welcome today. Your presence implies your consent to being broadcast. And further information about the live streaming protocols can be found on the council's website. Health and safety, in case of an emergency, please follow the building wardens to the nearest exit, and our meeting point is just across the road at Peace Park. Bathroom facilities are located just opposite the council's foyer entrance. The move to apologies. I do have an apology from Councillor Puller, and also just in terms of lateness, apologies from Councillor Immick. She's had to pop out for 5 or 10 minutes and she will be back a little bit late, but her apologies on that. Do I have a mover on? Thank you. Two. And a seconder. Thank you, Mayor. All those in favour? Carried. There are no announcements, tributes, conflict of interest. Just to remind members, if there are any financial or non-financial conflicts of interest to declare, please, through the meeting, if something comes up, please let me know. There's no public participation today, and so we'll move to agenda item 6, which is the confirmation of minutes, and that is page 9 of the agenda. Are there any corrections to the meeting minutes? Okay, just before confirming these minutes, we'll review the action sheet on page 10. And Bevan, I'll ask you to run through the action sheet, please.
Morena tātou. So we've got 3 actions on the action sheet. The first one is relation to a request for information around risk 6, which was related to an IT security audit. So we do those digital systems security audits annually. There will be a report to the next committee coming in relation to that. Apologies, sorry, my mic wasn't on. The next one was in relation to Civic Centre building certification status. That one is still underway. We don't have anything to report back yet on that one. And then airport annual report update. So in the comments there, we've provided a bit of a overview of the current conversations with Audit New Zealand and the Ministry of Transport in relation to that audit, and some of those conversations are very recent. One of the requirements we may need to do is go back a number of years to try and tidy up the equity imbalance in that report.
Just on that, in my experience with some other councils who also have that same issue arising in relation to their airport arrangements, where government is a shareholder, and so you're not alone in some of these revisitations, shall we say, of treatments. It's unfortunate that one would have thought that they'd have been solved a few years ago, but they're not, and they are holding up a lot of processes. So I feel for you on that one, Bevan. Right, do we have any corrections or any points of interest? Look, I'll move that the minutes out of the Risk Assurance Committee meeting held on the 29th of November 2024 be confirmed as true and correct record. Do I have a mover? Thank you, too. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Leslie. And I'll put the motion that all those in favour? Aye. Thank you, carried. So we move to agenda item 7 on the reports, 7.1, which is the Risk and Assurance Update Report, and the General Manager, Bevan Gray, will be giving us an update on that.
Thank you, Chair. So this is a new report format. So what we're trying to do is capture the updates that you would have regularly been receiving in terms of separate reports and around standing items and information. So those are reports you would just normally receive. Trying to combine those so you're only receiving one report of regular update information, and then separate pieces of information or work or items requiring decision will come in a separate paper. So it's about trying to manage your workload and what you're reviewing. So what I'd like to highlight in here, we've got 3 meetings in the program, and that's because the one after September will be in a new triennium, so we haven't set any calendar dates around that yet. We've tried to capture everything that we think will be coming to those meetings. There will be some items such as internal insurance updates, etc., that will happen as needed, because those are separate pieces of work. I'd like to highlight also our journey around risk management. So what we've currently got is quite detailed, and at the moment we're in a little bit of a halfway house, so you'll still see the risk register updated with actions as you have in the past. But what I'd like to signal is that good risk management is about good conversations around the table at a governance level and at a high level. So in terms of detail, less is probably more in relation to risk management, and what we're aiming to identify and discuss are some of the things that are happening in the environment that are potentially trending or impacting the risk that this organisation's exposed to. From attendance to previous risk and assurance committee meetings, what we've got hasn't enabled those kind of conversations. So I think the first steps will be looking at what are the key risk categories that we're exposed to and what risks, where they sit. Generally, all the risks that we could be exposed to will sit in the categories that I've outlined. And then there's a conversation around what is the risk appetite of governance in relation to each of those categories. What I'd like to do is probably start those conversations with the new triennium really early, because that'll help us to figure out how do we work for the next 3 years through that triennium. Any questions in relation to risk?
Thanks, Bevan. I'd just confirm that this has been an ongoing thing that has been, we're working through in order to create a document for the members of this committee that give you an intuitive look at where risk's trending in a material form, so that you can think of the big picture, because that's really what this committee is about. It's about the big picture. Notwithstanding that the granular detail is there, and really what Bevan and the team are doing is that they're going to try and connect that detail. But that's that will be appendices. The report that you're going to look at is going to, once that risk appetite has been assessed, and then that will be an important way of being able to intuitively understand what it is you're looking to manage, the degree of materiality that risk has to council, and I think that certainly after in the new triennium, the risk appetite of the council may well change to what it is now, and it needs to be a dynamic thing. But just as a heads up, that's something that's going in the really, for me, looking at this, having been your independent chair for a few years now, it's going in the right direction. And these things don't take, they do take time. So thanks very much for that update. Look, if there's no questions,
Make a comment. Yeah.
sorry, Leslie.
Yeah, no. Good morning, everybody. I'm like you, Stu. We've come a long way from where we started from, and I think we've never really had a risk appetite discussion across all the risk categories. So I agree that going forward, that would be really useful for us to do, because we've been more responsive to things that are happening to us rather than thinking about what may come.
So just to warn everybody that comes back in the new training, that will be one of those workshops that we'd really like to get done in the first month or two, because I think it will really set the scene for the incoming council. Just as a warning, and also just for governance, to understand that's a workshop which we're going to want to fit in to what is a packed schedule for councillors. Look, I'll move that the Risk and Assurance Committee receives the Risk and Assurance Update March 2025 report. I'll put the motion. Do I have a mover? Yep. Seconder? Thank you, Sue. All those in favour? Carried.
Can I just highlight something as well?
Mm-hmm.
Within that report, there was a Treasury update. We do have PWC coming online at 9:45 to provide a bit of a Treasury overview. So they've got a brief slide pack, and so any conversation or questions you have in relation to how we're managing Treasury, save those for them.
Yeah, now, I was going to come to that as a separate item, obviously, because we've got the presentation, and I certainly have a few things that we'll be keen to talk to PWC about. That's fairly fixed, the 9:45 slot, or do you think we're going to be able? Is there any wriggle room? I know that they'll be calling in from two different places.
Yeah, there may be some wriggle room. We'll see when they.
Yes. Okay, so we'll come back to that at 9:45. So we'll come back to item 7.1.2. And we're rolling ahead rather quickly, which is good. So we'll move through to 7.2, which is the Internal Audit Update Report. And again, Bevan Gray and we've got Ingrid Niven. Hi, Ingrid, welcome, to give us an update on this. Now, this is to refer to pages 64 and 91 of the agenda.
Awesome. Good morning, everybody. The purpose of this report is to set out the internal assurance program and to provide an update on recent audits completed. Following the guidance provided by this committee on the 13th of November 2023, we identified and agreed 4 key areas for our internal audit work program. I am pleased to report that we have made progress and have completed our first audit. This internal audit, or this initial audit, focused on the procurement of emergency unplanned works. The findings from this audit have been documented and shared with the relevant stakeholders. The audit identified 8 key findings, 1 high, 3 moderate and 4 low. And for the high priority finding, we have already started actioning these and are planning to run a tender process to establish a panel of contractors available for emergency procurement works, highlighted in the report. Completing this audit marks a significant step in our ongoing efforts to enhance Council's risk management practices and ensure robust internal controls. Further details and findings are referenced in this paper, but happy to take questions.
Councillor Immink.
Thank you. This is looking really great. Thank you very much, Ingrid. Have we asked any of our, I know this is internal, but have we asked any of our external contractors to cast their eye over it? Because sometimes we get stuck in looking inside, and sometimes they can just give you one good suggestion or say, well, this happened to me. Have we got any thought about that? I know there's probably confidentiality perhaps in there, but some of our key contractors might be able to.
Yeah, thank you for that. We haven't, but certainly can look at that for future.
All right,
Thank you.
I think just to highlight, it was an external auditor that undertook our internal audit.
Okay, yeah.
So we weren't ourselves looking at our own practices. So it did have a different set of eyes looking over it. But you do raise a good point, and I think what we'd like to do is look through the recommendations, have a plan around implementing them, and we do have a civil construction sector group that we regularly engage with.
Yes.
And we can talk about emergency procurement potentially with them. They'll get a lot more exposure to it through the creation of the panel. So that will create a good forum for those discussions.
All right, thank you.
Yes.
I know this is about the actual procurement itself, but since this is a risk committee, the risk of a major weather event, I think, is significant. And I mean, we've got an example of what happened on the East Coast already. And whilst we might have the processes for procuring, you've got to have the money to procure. So I'm just wondering what plans we have in place to mitigate the risk that we do have an emergency and we have no money to pay for anything, if you know what I mean. So forward planning, actually get ready.
It's a really great question. And one thing I can mention, because it's a quick come up over the years with me, with a number of councillors, that is why you have a liquidity buffer built in to the policy of the organisation. That liquidity buffer requirement, that's why it's in there with the LGFA, that's why it's in with your policy, which is a 10% buffer on your debt. It ensures that you always have access to readies in the event of an emergency. So the level of that buffer at the moment, I think the ANZ facility is 20 million?
Pass.
Hmm?
Pass.
Yeah,
I think so.
I think it's, we will move on to that, but I believe it's about $20 million. And that's one of its key purposes, is for when the unexpected occurs and you've got to have access straight away to money. So that's that's another reason why you have a liquidity.
In the event that that's inadequate, which it could quite easily be, because $20 million doesn't get you very far these days, what are our contingencies? What steps would we take?
So I said that was 20 million.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I don't think that that's really that much in the scheme of things. In the event that that there's a significant risk that exceeds that amount, what then?
And if I go back to that, when we talked about the risk appetite of this council, and so I mean, it's really important. It is a really important question and a really important conversation to have. And that is part of that conversation that council will have in the new triennium around that risk register, because then that's going to put a real torch on that particular item which you do have. It is one of your areas of risk, and those are exactly the sorts of questions that you then understand, what are we going to do to mitigate it? Because part of that risk appetite will be the suggestion and the recommendations to management on how you want to mitigate that potential risk. And if you don't think 20 million's enough, then you will be ensuring that you have the capabilities of something that's more. That might mean an increase to your liquidity buffer, but that will be your decision, and that's exactly the sort of thing that workshop's going to achieve. That I've put on you. Sorry.
Thank you. Just a question in regard to that emergency buffer. I know that we have an emergency fund for immediate action, and it's limited very low, so we put a little bit aside every year. We probably spend it every year, the amount of emergencies we have. Could you explain that liquidity buffer to me? So obviously we don't have it sitting in a bank account, but are you saying that we have the ability, over all the funds we've got in reserves, etc. like that 20 million of that is always there to be made available at short notice, even though it's targeted at other things within the organisation? Is that what you're talking about with your fluidity?
The reason why you have a liquidity buffer, and that any organisation will and should have a liquidity buffer, is to enable an organisation to continue its obligations in terms of its immediate future commitments to basically paying your bills. It's there to ensure council pays its legal and committed obligations. And it's there in case. It's there in case the unexpected occurs, because broadly speaking, you've got forecasts, you've got a good idea of what those obligations are, and that's the normal operation that the council will have. But if, as the Mayor has indicated, if something really happens and you're requiring immediate access to money to pay for those commitments, that is the purpose of having a liquidity facility.
Yeah, I understand all that, the reason for it, but where are you finding that 20 million from? It's not sitting under Bevan's desk, it's not sitting under a separate...
See, at the moment it exists as a committed and undrawn facility that you have with the ANZ Bank.
Okay,
and you can
okay.
use it as and when you need to.
So it's the ability to use it if necessary, but we're not paying for it in the meantime.
They've provided you an umbrella, and it's up to you to choose to put it up.
We pay for a line, basically a charge to have that cash available to us. It sounds like it is an important conversation. So, there's varying levels of natural disaster or weather events. If it gets to a certain level of significance, it triggers a civil defence response, which comes with different sets of powers and potential government funding. It might be worthwhile having perhaps a deep dive into that risk in the new triennium to understand appetite, what are the options around funding it, because each of our activities and areas will fund storm events in a different way. We've got a few storm reserves that we put money away for. We know Waka Kotahi has funding that they allow from a contribution perspective for storm events and responses to them. So perhaps that's something we dive into.
Yeah, I mean, the sort of events I'm thinking of are really catastrophic, and there's vulnerable infrastructure around, like the water plant, for example, an earthquake, destroys it completely. $20 million doesn't buy your water plant. the bridge gets taken out. $20 million doesn't buy you a bridge. Those things, and that might lead into the discussions over insurance. I don't know if a bridge is insured, is it?
It's not our bridge.
No, so we'll be faced with the same issues that they were on the East Coast about how to actually. But anyway, that's.
I think Lainey wants to
Just
jump in there.
before, yes, sorry, just before we move on from that, I think we will confirm an action item on this with you, Bevan. Once we've, on this particular subject, and Lanny, you've got
Thank you,
something
Chair.
can
I would
give
like
us
to
some
comment on that
clarification?
before you confirm the action, if you
Yes,
don't mind,
please.
which is that we already have some planning for catastrophic event planning in the pipeline, and we are intending to conduct a workshop early in the new triennium for exploring what those possibilities could look like. And what I'm hearing is we should include in there emergency powers and emergency access to funding. Is that right?
Yes.
Great,
That's
thank you.
fantastic. Now, that's going to be in the new training. That'll be in the early. So if we could please, as an action, link that to the risk workshop, because I think it will be a really good part of that. And it might even form a section of that workshop,
Yep.
if I could make that suggestion.
And we could try and do that before the end of the calendar year, in fact, because I know there's an appetite with our friends at Emergency Management Bear Plenty to make sure that the new council is really well inducted
Brilliant.
into that.
Thank you very much. Is that a reasonably clear action? Thank you very much, Susan. Yes, Leslie.
Still on the report.
Okay.
And I possibly could have raised it in the previous report from page 14. So we seem to have everything covered. I just wanted to cross-reference them, but we haven't actually said anything about digital connectivity in an emergency. And that was actually one of the big barriers, when Gabrielle came. So I'm not sure whether in the risk categories, we do have something on cybersecurity and IT, but do we have a backup connectivity system across the district? And whether that would sit here in this procurement policy as part as well, if we needed emergency access to it.
I don't think it would sit in the procurement policy as such, but I mean, if there is a significant event, the controller has powers to requisition whatever they need.
Okay.
If it's an event that triggers communication outages, then they'll, get generators and Starlink or satellite phones, etc.
So do we have that plan? That's what I'm saying. Like, we shouldn't say we can do it. How can we demonstrate how we can do it?
That'll probably come through what Lainey was talking about.
Okay. Someone else wants to talk?
I suspect we have an emergency response plan which would cover things you may need to do in an emergency. So, and this conversation is not about the emergency response plan, so we haven't prepared for it. But I think it would be covered in the emergency response planning.
Okay, can we remove the think and have a no for the next triennium?
Well, I only say think because we haven't prepared any information about emergency response planning because it's not covered in this report or the recommendations. So that's why I use the word think. But I mean, if you want us to confirm that in our emergency response planning there is some section that covers off connectivity and communications in emergencies, I guess we could do that. I suspect it's online, actually.
Oh, look, I'm not even trying to. I'm not trying to shoot a messenger. It'll be awkward. But our previous emergencies have shown up some highlighted weaknesses. If you're waiting on the Bay of Plenty Regional Defence or National Civil Defence, and I maybe this is out of context, but
Yeah. Well, some of the work that's happening with the Better Off funding stuff is looking at satellite, Starlink, that sort of stuff. So we are doing a bit of that.
okay.
And I guess in your workshop you'll be covering connectivity in the event of a catastrophic event.
Absolutely, we will do that at that same session, but I can tell you in the meantime that we've just signed off recently connectivity through Starlink for our emergency situations, so that's all underway, but we can certainly bring that back to you.
All right, thank you.
I can sell you on VHF radio if you want.
Not funny.
No, it's not. But you're not talking about major telecommunications infrastructure, are you? Because that's in the hands of,
Well, I'm just saying, like if the power goes
yeah,
out.
yeah, oh, yeah,
what's
power,
happening?
okay.
Councillor Isles.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just wondering, all this is to be put in place for the beginning of the new triennium. I'm just wondering if staff can give us the assurance that we have sufficient measures in place should we experience one of those emergencies between now and the triennium, because we're coming into the winter season and, touching wood, it's quite on the cards that something like that can happen within this district.
I can give you that assurance, Councillor Isles. We have in our BAU functions, we have ongoing training, we have ongoing emergency planning. It can always improve and it will improve, but should something happen tomorrow, we should be fairly well prepared to respond.
Just a supplementary to that. Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
My supplementary to that was, hopefully just following on from the Deputy Mayor's comment there regards communications, the remote areas are the ones that are really at risk, so it would be good if that's followed through sooner rather than later.
Thank you, Councillor. With the Mayor and I attending the Civil Defence regional meetings, they give you this list of everyone who has got their staff trained for emergencies, and Whakatane has never had all green. We've always been like about 20 people short across our teams. So what are we doing about that?
Through you, Chair, we had a meeting yesterday in our monthly emergency management catch-up here at WDC, and we had an item there looking at the training and the roster. We actually think we're in pretty good shape comparatively, given the standard kind of turnover of staff, but there are areas that we've identified that do need urgent resourcing, one of which is safety, connected to that health and safety role that we're trying to fill for the organisation as well. But we are really conscious of those gaps, and we have a really strong team, including a new manager, Lou Hunt, who you met last week, who has that as a top priority. I would say that having all green would be really unusual, just because people come and go, and getting them trained does take time. There's always a slight lag, but again, the training, the emergency management officers here at Whakatane have a plan for that, and they are working really hard to make sure our training is up to date.
Thank you.
Now, Councillor Rangiora, I think, did you have a question? No.
Kia ora, I was just supporting Andrew in terms of our very isolated areas up at Ruatahuna because of those roads.
Thank you. Councillor Oz.
Thank you, Chair. Just to follow on, I mean, the community emergency plans too are something that council had been part of over the years gone by, but I know for a fact a lot of those need a refresh. So if our new manager can get a look over that as well, it would certainly give us a greater coverage. Thank you, Chair.
Great. I had one or a couple of observations, and interestingly, one of them was about our preparedness for staff relocations, remote access, and working, which is essentially that ability to communicate. So that was just something that I didn't see in the external independent audit. The other thing, if I could make a recommendation, that when you are considering, and I really like the idea of being fully prepared with panels of contractors, where you, which is a key recommendation. But I would also ensure that your panel of contractors does have a very reasonable geographical spread. You can't, as much as we will want to use as many local contractors as possible, you could have an event which you really need to have contractors that are outside of the hit area, in the sense that you do need to have, you need to have in that panel people that can externally come into the district, as opposed to potentially being stuck inside the district. And keep that one in the back of your mind when you're putting your panel together, please. Any further debate? Well, look, I'll move that the Risk and Assurance Committee receives the Internal Audit March 2025 report. Do I have a mover? Thank you, Leslie. Oh, I did indeed, I did. Do I have a seconder? Thanks for listening. And all those in favour? Great. Now it's 9:35. I'm just thinking in terms of might be a good time. We had a 10-minute break. Or adjourn. Why don't we adjourn and have a break? I'm going to suggest that we adjourn for 10 minutes, come back for the 9:45 presentation, which will be from PWC, but we use this as our a short break for a cup of coffee. So back here, please, at yes, 9:45 will be enough time, won't it? Yeah.
That's better. Good. Hi, everybody.
And we're going to go back to 7.1.2, which is the presentation from PWC in relation to Treasury. But just before we do and introduce PWC, I'll get Bevan Gray to reintroduce, as in that item, which is 7.1, the Risk and Assurance Update Report, the Treasury Report component. So, Bevan, would you like to introduce the subject matter, and then we'll pick it up with our friends at PwC.
Morena, and welcome Raj and Brett. So part of the Risk and Insurance Update Report, we have a Treasury section. We've just sort of put that on hold until the team from PwC could finish their earlier meeting. So we use PwC to provide us with some Treasury advice. They do that for a significant part of the local government sector, provide advice around borrowing, how we stage borrowing, set metrics around terms, provide advice around our Treasury and investment management policies, and also support us around how do we manage interest rate risks, etc. So we've got a couple of sections in the report that provide a bit of an overview, and then in the appendix that the Chair referenced in 7.1.2, we have a PwC extract report. I thought I'd just sort of invite PwC, because we seem to have a number of questions in previous meetings around, and also in finance performance meetings around how we're managing risks, why we're pre-funding or pre-borrowing for debt repayments. So I thought it would be great to have PwC here to provide a bit of an overview and answer any of those questions. So I'll hand it over to you, Brett or Raj.
Well, welcome, Brett and Raj. Good to see you again, and in your most capable hands, Brett.
Thank you so much, Stu and Bevan, and morning, everybody. How much time do we have together? Because we'll probably take Q&A at some point.
You've got a fair bit of time.
Oh, good. Good, okay.
Yes. More time than I would ever need.
There you go. Yes, morning, everybody. Brett Johansson, Treasury Advisor to Council for a number of years and Executive Director with PwC, and joined also with Raj, a manager in our Treasury Advisory team, who's been working with Council for a number of years as well. Raj, did you want to say any words of introduction?
I think you've covered it off, but yeah, we've been with the team for 9 years, so got plenty of experience and been involved with council for a number of those years as well as across other councils in the area as well. So yeah.
Great, and happy to take questions through the slide as we go through the slides, if that's appropriate. So I thought I'd share the slide pack, which I think you've got copies of. So Raj, I think I'll do that. I'll just get that up on the screen. Can folks see the slide deck?
Yep. Looks good.
Looks
brilliant. Okay. In terms of what we thought we'd cover today is as a Treasury Management update, just to provide some context in terms of what Council does around Treasury management, introduce the risk management environment that Council operates within, and that'll provide some context to the next session, which is identifying the Treasury risks that Council has as a natural part of its business. We'll delve then into the interest rate swap product or instrument, which is widely used across the sector and used by Council in managing its wholesale interest rate risk. And then we'll close out with a summary of what we've covered. So we start with the environment in which we think about and manage our Treasury risks. We're very much one of a risk manager. And it's really is helped by the Local Government Act, and it uses the words prudent financial manager. So in Council's Treasury management activities, any decision around managing Treasury risks needs to be well judged and sort of care taken in the decisions that it makes. So we've put up there some of the paragraphs pulled out of the Local Government Act, and some of the words of interest are not only the word prudent, but also stewardship, and also thinking about the current and future interests of the community. So very much a stewardship and intergenerational focus to what we think about when we're managing the short and medium and longer term Treasury risks of Council. So thinking of not only the current ratepayer base, but also the future ratepayer base. And this helps in terms of providing the overall objectives in terms of what we're seeking to achieve. And you'll see within your Treasury policy that statutory objectives are really part of the introduction to the policy framework, and all the policy statements that are within the Treasury policy really align with those overall statutory objectives. So importantly, from a risk framework perspective, Council is a risk manager. And when we think about our role within managing these Treasury risks, or the Treasury function as it sits within the finance team, it also provides comfort to our key stakeholders. And when we think about stakeholders and Council's business, very much our ratepayers, the LGFA, or Local Government Funding Agency, is where we essentially borrow most of our debt. We have relationships with bank lenders. Obviously, a key stakeholder is our auditors, and also, importantly, our credit rating agency, Fitch. So all those stakeholders are certainly key in the way that we think about ourselves and manage and operate our Treasury function. So the risk framework also provides a safeguard for us, and it's quite interesting, isn't it, when you reflect back now 5 years from about today. I think we went into Mr. Bloomfield's COVID lockdown, and that was a financial market shock to us. And if you remember, credit margins or funding margins doubled on the day as the markets in New Zealand reacted to what was happening in terms of external funding and financial markets. So generally what we find in New Zealand, that financial market shocks, whether they be the the global financial crisis, which was back in 2008, 2009, or the COVID as being a more recent observation of a financial market shock. This will protect, this framework, or the policy framework that you've got, will protect council, so council can get on and continue with its business of doing what council does. So also the framework that you've got within council manages the variability of your borrowing costs, because the very nature of council is you from that intergenerational perspective, you are doing 30-year asset plans, you are doing 10-year long-term plans, you are doing a shorter dated annual plan, and within those plans you're making assumptions, key assumptions around underlying operating costs, and one of those operating costs or expenses is borrowing costs. So by having a framework which essentially spreads and smooths your risk, it will smooth out the variability you'll have in your actual borrowing costs to plans. So it does provide a certain element of certainty, a certain element of protection around those long-term borrowing costs, particularly when you think of the assumptions you put into your long-term plan and consult every 3 years. So the framework is there as an element of protection, an element of spreading and smoothing those risks, those treasury risks that you naturally accrue through council's normal business. And council will interact with the funding and financial markets through raising its debt borrowing through the local government funding agency, through entering into interest rate instruments such as interest rate swaps, which we'll talk about soon. And these instruments, the price in which you transact these instruments will change based on what's happening in the underlying, so financial markets. So this slide is I call the honeycomb. Whoops, excuse me. This is not good timing. I don't think this is good timing for me. Raj, sorry about this. Are you able to sort of carry on the presentation? Sorry, I think I've got to evacuate the building.
That's a fire alarm, is it?
Okay, I'm very sorry about this, but Raj has got this all under hand.
No,
sorry. This is called risk management, I suppose.
Brett, you do anything to get out of a presentation if I know you.
Right, let's bring this presentation up.
Very timely, Mr. Mayor. Auckland.
Right.
So you're on, Raj.
Sorry, just gonna bring everything back on screen. There we go. Yep. So I guess this is the Treasury risk framework, as Brett was starting to cover off. And yeah, you rightly said, it's kind of got it in a honeycomb kind of shape, but essentially the policy covers off the few major aspects there in terms of the delegations, your liquidity and debt funding framework, investments, interest rate risk management, counterparty credit exposures, and then the operational risk management as well. I guess in terms of the delegations, it sets out, I guess, the dealing limits and management responsibilities there in terms of who's doing what, and I guess we're looking to ensure appropriate segregation of duties there, and ensuring that there's appropriate dealing limits there as well to avoid error or fraud. Not that that's a base case, but yeah, the framework is there to protect against any kind of error like that. So by separating duties there. On the liquidity and debt funding side, the framework allows council to have a spreading and smoothing of that funding risk, so that we're not got all our eggs in one basket in terms of refinancing debt that is falling due. So the liquidity component around that is ensuring that we have sufficient liquidity to meet our obligations as they fall due as well. So the framework there will ensure that we have sufficient liquidity, and then the funding policy there would ensure that we have a good spread of debt maturities as well, so that we aren't exposed to a large concentration of refinancing and repricing risk at one particular point in time. And so essentially what the funding policy looks to do is it enables the council to have a bit of time to adjust to new pricing if margins were tracking higher. Your entire portfolio is not being impacted by, or not moving to that higher repricing at that one particular point in time. So it protects council in that way, as you kind of average higher if margins are tracking higher. Yeah. The investment policy is I guess pretty straightforward really. The management of the treasury investments there, the interest rate risk management looks to kind of manage the volatility around interest rates, and we have seen quite a volatile interest rate environment, and so that the framework provides a band in which you can look to fix interest rates, and we have a few tools that we look to utilize to fix some of those interest rate obligations. So using interest rate swaps being one of them, and fixed rate debt, and we'll come to those later on in the presentation. If we look at the counterparty exposures tab, that's really looking to ensure that we minimize risk from having a counterparty default, and therefore we're looking to ensure that we have an adequate spread of risk between various counterparties, and so we provide a framework within the policy which looks to kind of enforce some level of spreading there to protect against having all your eggs in one basket per se. Yeah. Sorry. So yeah, this page here will just talk to a little bit of about the sensitivity of wholesale interest rate movements, and we're based off the current Power BI tool here and most recent data we have. So apologies if it's not 100% accurate there, but it's the most up-to-date data we had in terms of rates revenue as well. So yeah, council currently have best part of roughly 180 million of drawn debt. If all that debt was on a floating interest rate basis, a 1% movement higher in interest rates would result in an increase of interest expense of roughly 1.8 million. Based on a rates revenue of 55 million, that would require 3.2% increase to offset the increased interest expense that is incurred by the increase in the underlying floating rate. So that's why it is important to be managing that risk, because it is a material exposure there for council. This chart just talks to or looks at the OCR and BKBM rate, and you can see those kind of been tracking over time. And we've had a period where we've had interest rates track higher very quickly and very sharply, and so it was good that we were able to look in some kind of fixing to protect council from those movements higher in interest rates. And now that we're seeing some of the movements lower in the short end of the curve, we're able to look at some strategies there to help council protect risk. But yeah, you can generally see that BKBM tracks, well, it's hard to tell on this graph because the scale is quite short, but roughly BKBM is generally 20 bips over the OCR, trading over the OCR. So we'll move on to the next slide anyway.
Excuse me, Raj, are you okay to take the odd question? I'll try and manage it so that we don't lose sight of the presentation. But I know that Councillor Immink would like to ask you a question. If you're happy with that at the moment, or would you prefer questions at the end?
Absolutely, go for it.
Oh, good morning, Raj. It's actually just to the previous slide. What does BKBM mean?
Apologies. That's the floating rate, so the 90-day bank bill rate in New Zealand. So that's the that's what is used as the benchmark 3-month bank bill rate, floating rate.
Okay, bank bill rate. Thank you.
That's the market's equivalent of the OCR. The OCR is an overnight rate, but then the market, when it wants to price everything, so every company in New Zealand that has debt often measures that debt against the 90-day bank bill rate, and the bank bill rate for the 90 days is what the market thinks the OCR is going to get to in 3 months' time. So it's a benchmark.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, Raj, I'll try not to steal your thunders.
Very, very good. Feel free to hit. Over here we've got our LGFA funding margins chart, and as Brett kind of alluded to at the start, back in 2020 when we had the lockdowns announced, margins skyrocketed, and we've kind of just got that on the end of the graph there. For some reason, it would be nice to have that chart a bit longer, actually. But you can see when rates were coming back down. But essentially, we went into lockdown, we had a massive spike in those funding margins, and it wasn't until we had intervention from the RBNZ, which brought those margins lower. Now, if there was no framework in place and there was no spreading and smoothing of that funding risk, and you had all your debt maturing at that point in time, the entire debt portfolio would be repricing at those higher margins. So that's why it's important to have adequate spread of those maturities to ensure that it gives council time to adjust to the new market conditions, really. So that's the purpose.
Raj, can I ask a question? Is each one of those lines on that graph a loan that we have with LGFA?
No, this is just checking the historical timeline of how those LGFA margins have tracked for the various tenors. So that you've got and council would have at points along this curve borrowed one of these bonds or tenors, right? So
sorry to interrupt, Raj. It's probably because it's very hard to see the key, but I'll just explain. That's showing since 2020, and I know it's very busy. And the reason why it's busy is that if you take the very lowest LGFA line, that is an LGFA maturity. So it could be a 1-year bond. What's the cost of 1 year money? And all the way up to their longest term bond, which is sometimes 18 years. So the reason why you're seeing that is that the longer debt is, that usually has a higher margin than short-term debt. So that's giving you an idea of how each of those respective maturities from the LGFA traded. And you can see that their long-dated debt was trading upwards of 130 basis points, so 1.2, 1.3%. And then you'll see below how the short-term debt trades, and that generally trades at a much lower spread. And when we say this is called margin, and this is the LGFA's margin. But that's what influences your cost of funds immediately. Sorry to do that, Raj. It was just that we couldn't see what the noise meant.
Yes, no worries. And sorry, I'm not sure how clear the graph is, but you can see that, funding margins, particularly in those longer dated tenors, has deepened a bit. So we're starting to see a much more steeper funding curve. And so I guess from a policy perspective, we want to ensure that there's a good spread of maturities, but from a strategy perspective, it's probably not ideal to be paying those higher margins. So trying to keep borrowing short within the policy framework. So still ensuring that there's a good spread, but from a strategy perspective, we want to be protecting council from those higher funding margins as well. Yeah.
Thanks, Raj. Just got a question. In all of the local water done well conversations, there has been a point raised that LGFA does have longer term debt, so sort of some of those 15 to 30 year tranches of funding, but they don't seem popular within the local government sector, and is the reason because of the higher margins on it?
I would suspect so. Yeah. I guess. Yeah. What we are seeing in terms of the investor behaviour is generally in times of heightened uncertainty or geopolitical tensions, you see investors kind of flock towards safe haven or higher credit rated investments and shorter dated investments as well, and therefore we've seen good support for the shorter dated LGFA bonds, and that's helped anchor the margins for funding margins that the LGFA are able to lend at to councils for those shorter dated bonds, but we haven't seen the same level of support for some of those longer dated bonds, and so that's why we're kind of seeing some of that steepening as well. And so it probably doesn't make those longer dated borrowing tenors as attractive. That would be my take. Yeah, I'm sure. Was that?
I might pick that question up later at the end of the presentation. I have a couple of questions, and I might pick that one up again with you, Raj, and get your thoughts and advice. It'll link to that particular question, but also link to the council's current weighted average debt. So I'll leave those questions until the end.
No problem. So this page here just looks at councils. We've got Brett rejoining us. Okay, Brett.
Hi there. Sorry for that inconvenience.
No problem. I might cover off this slide, Brett, and then shoot back to you. So, yeah, on the debt forecast page here, we've got councils. I guess this first line here, this bottom line here, is councils' LTP forecast from was it 2021? So you can see how that differs from the most recent LTP forecast, which is this pink line here, which is a lot more upward sloping and steeper. And then we've got a management forecast, which kind of haircuts some of the LTP forecast to what might be more realistic number of what might be delivered. And that's ensuring, and we think that's good practice, and a lot of councils do that as well, because what it does ensure is that you're not getting into a position where you're overhedged because that the projects aren't delivered and the debt isn't raised. So having a kind of haircutted forecast that you manage to has been good practice across the sector as well. Anything you want to add on this, Brett? We move forward.
Yeah, I think this is the last slide of our first section, which talks to the operating environment in which councils doing business in, particularly in terms of the business of treasury management. So you would have seen that slide on wholesale interest rate risks, the variability of BKBM. You would have seen the funding margins.
Sorry, Brad, may I ask just a quick question before we go off this slide?
Yes,
because
sure
I think
thing, Stu.
it'd be a really pertinent one for council, especially given that we're deep into conversations around Three Waters. Is it your observation, given that you are advising a significant part of the local government market, that here we see the dynamic, updated management forecast on what debt's looking like in reality, which is updated, I believe, every month from information that comes into the organisation around the progress of CapEx, other things. You know, it's getting a steer on the reality of what that dynamic forecast is looking like. You would be seeing that probably with the majority of your clients, I would imagine, as well. My question is, are you starting to see two, one with, one without Three Waters in terms of the forward management? As you've mentioned, this is a big thing that is concerning councils and the understanding of, look, what is it that we're actually managing? And what do we know and what do we not know? Could you perhaps just comment on that, please?
Yes, no, good question, and absolutely that's the current conversation across our council clients around, I suppose local water's done well. Obviously by, I think it's the 3rd of September, isn't it? Consultation needs to be complete and councils will know what direction they're travelling in regards to waters. So for a number of councils, it's still a little bit unsure as to whether it's going to be current state, a single-owned water CCO or a multi-council owned CCO. So they're starting to put together that updated water-related debt forecast together, and probably now starting to feel a little bit more confident in terms of direction of travel there, Stu. And certainly it was the case when we had the old Three Waters piece and it was all going to happen on July 24. That was very much part of one of the debt scenarios that we'd been managing ourselves to. The other question is still to be ironed out is the debt transfer post a date in the future, whether that be, if you think about the water CCO in Wellington, they're talking about July 26, but most councils will be talking about July 27 as being the date in which any sort of economic transfer of debt and borrowing costs happen. So, yeah, very much so. And I think also around policies, there's been some councils are now taking the opportunity to think about their policy and giving management the ability to consider that water-related debt forecast in the decisions that they make around debt management and interest rate risk management. So I'd say over the next 6 months, Stewie, that will be very much part of the three scenarios sitting within the debt forecast page.
I guess where this is really important to me and trying for council to understand, there's a lot of reticence by councils around the country that they've been, look, we're not going to make decisions on interest rates because, to the point that you've just previously said, you know, what you like to do is to ensure that small decisions made keep within a band. That means spreading the risk, doing some swaps. That might mean going and doing a 10-year swap because it's at a level that is economically advantageous to council on an intergenerational basis. But there's this nervousness by councils, and I can understand that nervousness, that, well, can we go and could we be making decisions at the moment on the dynamic path, which is the 239 mil in 2026, 315 mil by 2032. How are we making judgments around long-term swaps? Do you believe that the actions of those decisions will be transferred to the in a fair and reasonable way to the water entities? i.e. if this council was to, on your advice, make a decision to hedge 40 million of debt for 10 years at 3.5% because you recommended that was a very, very good level, intergeneration, it's ticking all the boxes, but there's this real nervousness that, well, if we do that, what happens to that? What happens to that swap when it's all being separated in 1, 2, or 3 years' time?
Yes. And, you know, yes, it is a conversation that's been happening, but from my perspective, or our perspective, the approach would be continue the intergenerational treasury management approach, and ultimately we're trying to do what's best for the ratepayer, both current and future ratepayer.
Yep.
So whether that ratepayer is getting water services from a separate entity, whether that council owned or multi-council owned, I think to be fair to the overarching statutory objectives you're trying to achieve, you would continue to manage it over the sort of medium to longer term. That would be the preferred approach. And as you say, if there was an opportunity to manage long-term interest rates at what is considered to be long-term beneficial or advantageous rates, you'd want to take the opportunity to do that. And that will also come back to the conversation around how the economically that water-related debt, how it's identified within the portfolio of debt, will ultimately transfer through to a water CCO. I would assume that the interest rate swaps probably won't be novated across just because the issues there in terms of the new transacting swap counterparty. But at first blush, Stuart, would be continue with the intergenerational approach to managing your long-term interest rate profile.
Thank you. That's probably the most important thing I really wanted, one of the really important things I really wanted this council to hear, because it's you know, the debt's not going to go away. It's just going to be cut and diced, but it's still going to be in your ratepayers are still essentially going to be influenced by the impacts. And so what Brett is saying is, don't wait because if there are good strategic reasons for risk management at the advice of your Treasury team and under advice from PWC as your independent advisor, those are not decisions that we should be holding off on because you're waiting for some legislation. Thanks, Brett.
And I think just the dynamic situation that we have continuously around managing council's treasury risk, you can see there's the variability in financial market rates, but one of the bigger pieces there is just understanding the debt forecast, both current and longer term. So if we move to the next page and just talk about some of the specific risks that council has, and you would have, Raj would have taken you through that honeycomb slide earlier. So just touching on those specific risks a little bit more in a focused area. Liquidity and funding risk management. Liquidity obviously being able to pay your obligations on time, and the funding risk being very much the funding of your intergenerational assets through the funding of long-term debt instruments. And again, we come back to the spreading and smoothing approach to around our short and long-term debt management. So reducing concentration risk and not taking a view on where underlying funding margins moving to into the future, but taking an averaged approach to this risk. Certainly the limit system within the policy gives some discretion, but ultimately it's encouraging and enforcing some sort of minimum amount of debt maturity spreading at any point in time. So it's important in terms of our treasury management activity that we're always mindful of the treasury policy limits and staying within those limits, and also the financial covenants that we need to be reporting to in terms of the LGFA. So not only that net debt to revenue covenant, but importantly the net interest expense covenants that we need to be reporting to. Obviously a spike up in funding margins may impact our current and future interest expenses, gross interest expense, which may flow through into those limits. So we want to be proactive around debt management. Yes, be mindful of what's happening with the debt forecasts. Typically, we raise our debt around the LGFA tender dates, which is every 4 to 6 weeks. We do use a technique, and we'll talk about that soon, is around the pre-funding of our upcoming debt maturities, and we can do that up to 18 months in advance. And again, that's spreading and smoothing that future risk and managing ourselves against any disruption to the funding markets. And typically we maintain a permanent liquidity buffer. Again, that's part of the suite of LGFA financial covenants that are sitting within the Treasury management policy, and that forms part of our ongoing liquidity management strategy.
Thanks, Brett.
Just
want to jump in there that you will have noted in our previous finance and performance quarterly reports that we have had pre-funded debt. So we've had higher interest revenue and higher interest expense as a result of that than budget.
Yes. And just focusing a little bit more on that, you'll see in the chart there, in terms of that 1 year time period, maybe Raj, put this cursor around that if you can. The 60 around, yes. So you can see we've got 16 million of debt maturing in the next year. We've already pre-funded that debt. So what we've done is that we've raised new debt, and the proceeds that we have received from that debt we've put on term deposit to mature close to the date of that upcoming maturing debt. So it's a sound risk management approach. It spreads our refinancing and repricing risk, and it's good from a liquidity coverage perspective. So when we think about Fitch, they'll be thinking about what debt and new debt is council going to raise over the next 12 to 18 months. How much of that debt still needs to be financed? That poses a sort of like a lesser or greater risk to your liquidity coverage ratio. So we're proactively forward managing this risk, and also we're motivated by spreading and smoothing that risk. So we can see in that table there, the funding summary, green is good in terms of those percentages. So in terms of our current debt portfolio and how it's maturing over time, we've got 43% of that debt maturing in the next 3 years. And then beyond the 3 years, we've got 57% of our debt. So we're managing ourselves to the policy limits that we have put in the policy, and as governors you have approved, to ensure that ongoing spreading and smoothing approach to managing our debt levels, which are now sitting at $177.5 million before any pre-funding is considered.
Could I ask a question, please, Brett and
Yes.
Raj? I see that the weighted average term of this council's debt is 2.93 years, so 3 years. Council's funding assets in excess of 20 years. Is that not a bit short?
It's a good question. There's a balance between achieving that long-term debt expectation and the price you pay for that debt. The funding curve per the LGFA is very steep at the moment, and so it's been a general strategy to maintain a shorter weighted average term rather than a longer weighted average term. Certainly the policy will allow council to borrow for a much longer term should those opportunities arise. The great thing about the LGFA in terms of what it's doing as a funder to the local government sector is it's great and easy access to liquidity. Then the question is, what is the price of that liquidity? And credit rating agencies like Fitch and Standard & Poor's give the LGFA in the local government sector a big tick for access to liquidity. So back in the day before the LGFA, yes, the private placement market, as it was called, it was quite fragmented and less reliable in terms of accessing cash or liquidity. Certainly the LGFA has provided a lot more comfort to the sector and the rating agencies around access to cash. And so it does allow, in some ways, an ability to have a shorter debt maturity profile. But nevertheless, there is a requirement within the policy that at least 25% of that debt needs to have a maturity date of 3 years plus. So, Stu, from a theoretical and corporate finance, I suppose, approach to managing your debt relative to the economic life of your intergenerational assets, yes, there'll be a motivation to get long-term debt, but we bring into that sort of like strategy and that motivation, what is the price of that debt as well.
Thank you very much, Brett. That's really, really helpful. And would I be right in assuming that you'd be looking at those long-term margins, and if they're, for example, the 18-year margin was to get to a level that you considered to be economically attractive, you would be making a recommendation to Bevan and the team, and that might be in the line of doing as you say, a pre-funding. It might motivate a strategy to pre-fund some debt that's maturing in the next 18 months. But that we just haven't been at that level for some time, I would imagine.
Yes, and by way of example, if I look at the funding margins per the LGFA at the moment, to just give you an example, a 2030 would be sitting around 90 or 0.9%, and a 2037 would be sitting around 1.3%, so 40 basis points, 0.4% higher per annum to achieve that longer dated tenor on your debt. So there is an assessment that is done around the worth, I suppose, of that long-term debt. But yes, if that funding curve was very flat, and the difference was 10 basis points, say, or 15 basis points, yeah, absolutely, there's a motivation there to continue to lengthen that maturity term.
Thanks very much. That's really beneficial to hear. The last question I have for you is, given the very recently published liquidity policy from the Reserve Bank, this is in particular for all the banks reporting into it, and that the only non-New Zealand government security that is acceptable, second tier as liquidity now, is LGFA. Do you see that that's going to have a really positive impact on these spreads going into the future? I'm thinking very strategically here, but what's your view on that in terms of LGFA spreads, the future of the LGFA spreads in light of that?
Yes, I would say that would be positive for LGFA spreads in terms of lower over time, based on that structural policy. You would see that as being attractive to LGFA margins in terms of it gives banks in particular, when they're buying LGFA bonds, that they can hold those bonds in their liquidity books, and should they need to raise liquidity quickly, or in a case of a market disruption, they can discount those securities with the Reserve Bank. So that means that banks per se will be have a regular appetite for and be strong buyers of LGFA bonds, albeit there'll probably be the shorter dated bonds, 2-3 year bonds, and we typically see the banks as being active in the tenders in terms of acquiring LGFA bonds. And you saw that, didn't you, back 5 years ago with the asset purchasing scheme introduced by the Reserve Bank at that time, and LGFA bonds were seen as being eligible security, and we saw those margins quickly move back to where they were trading more or less before the COVID lockdown happened. So there's a real example there of the impact of LGFA bonds being an eligible security for pricing and the market's appetite for them.
Thanks, Brett. I'll just mention that we've probably got about 10 minutes before.
Gosh.
if that's okay, I did stretch out quite a bit more time for you because I thought this was such a pertinent area and very, very topical at the moment. So I'm going to not interrupt you again until the end.
Okay, mate.
If you want to continue. Thanks very much, Brett.
Okay, well, let's dive into interest rate risk management, and this is where we separate our funding activity, the raising of borrowings, from our underlying interest rate, wholesale interest rate risk management activity. And that's because interest rate markets will move in a different way and cycle to funding margins. And it also gives us the ability to manage our longer term interest rate exposure that we have on our floating rate debt, separate to raising of debt. So we don't pay for that debt or that funding margin on that debt until we have actually drawn that debt down. So again, same sort of approach in terms of the policy objectives, spreading and smoothing our risk, reducing concentration of repricing risk and managing ourselves to our policy limits. And also that flows through in terms of reporting back to the LGFA financial covenants. We think about the net interest expense covenants that we report to. So interest rate markets, that shorthand out to 2 or 3 years, very much impacted by what the Reserve Bank's doing here in New Zealand around setting the OCR and managing inflation over the short to medium term. Long-term interest rates very much driven by what's happening with US interest rates and the US economy, the US central bank in terms of their outlook for growth and inflation. And it does get influenced by the odd tweet from Mr. T. But the strategies there, again, being quite proactive around the management of interest rate risk, forward managing that risk. So the flexibility is around the interest rate swap product, where we can start it in 2 business days time, or we can start it sometime in the future when existing interest rate swaps mature, or we've got an increase of debt, and or we need to meet our minimum policy requirements. You can use fixed rate debt as well. It doesn't have the flexibility of an interest rate swap, and interest rate swaps are by far the most popular and well-used instrument across the local government sector. So we go to the next page, and we've just taken a snip of your current interest rate profile that may be familiar to you. And we have our debt forecast that we manage our future interest rate exposure to. Those black lines form a corridor in which we want the orange block of interest rate swaps to sit within, and we need to be above that minimum line that goes across the page from around sort of 50 million and drops down in 2030, and we need to be managing ourselves below that black line that starts at 150 and sort of goes out towards 200 million over time. So we're always making sure that we're policy compliant, and what we're able to do with the Treasury tool is project the risk position forward to be proactive about really understanding when at the minimum we're falling below policy requirements, and we're thinking about interest rate swaps that we can transact well in advance of being outside of policy. This is where the debt forecast scenarios play an important part. So we need to understand that if debt levels are moving around significantly, particularly when we're talking about longer term debt, that we ensure that we don't get into an uncomfortable over-hedged or over-protected position. So the next slide is all about the features of interest rate swaps. And importantly, Council has the power enter into these instruments, and they're known as incidental arrangements in the Act, and it gives the council the ability to transact these instruments with bank counterparties. But they are and must be used within a controlled environment, and that's very much the Treasury management policy that approves these instruments to be used and the way in which they can be used. And again, these instruments give you the flexibility to, again, support your long-term planning and decision making in terms of those core decisions you need to be making around future borrowing costs. And it gives you the ability to manage that risk independently to your debt raising. And what I've got down below there is just a profile of what happens around the cash flows on an interest rate swap. And if you just focus around number 3 there with the swap facing a bank counterparty, so you transact these instruments with a bank, and they would have set up swap dealing lines with you under the legal documentation known as the ISDA documentation. And really what we're agreeing is to swap a floating interest rate, that became interest rate, with a fixed swap rate into the future. And typically where we can transact swap rates out at least 10 years, and all your bank counterparties are pretty competitive in pricing up these instruments. Remember, these instruments are negotiable, so they can be reprofiled and changed through their life if there are reasons to do that. And one of those reasons may be a significant change in your debt forecast, because we are making those medium to long-term Treasury management decisions, whether that be funding or whether it be interest rate decisions, and things will change in the future, as we've seen, particularly around waters. So if we go to the next slide, it's a bit of a dense slide, but just talking about the pros and cons of interest rate swaps. And it comes down to flexibility with a capital. If you're able to manage that risk in advance to meet your policy requirements and be able to benefit from advantageous long-term interest rates. And remember, it just so happens that those long-term interest rates are influenced by what's happening offshore, or typically in the US interest rate market, and these rates will change. And typically we're looking at transacting those long-term rates at 4% and below, and at the moment they're sitting around a 3.8% level. So,
sorry, Brad, I'm just wondering that we might, if we could wrap up.
Yes. Okay.
We've got a couple of presentations coming through. Would it be okay, please? And sorry, we have run out of time. It's one of those things which we could have put another half hour on and still needed some more. Would you please just provide council with your view on what keeps you up at night as a Treasury Risk Manager at the moment that this council should be aware of?
I think it's a good question. I think it's long-term interest rates, I would say, Stu.
Yep.
I think there's a lot going on from a geopolitical perspective.
Yes.
A lot more uncertainty that sort of needs still to play out, and being on our toes and agile around managing long-term interest rate risk. And so knowing and understanding what we need to do, being comfortable around those long-term debt forecasts is a real plus to being more proactive around long-term interest rates.
And what can we do for you to help you with those decisions?
I think it would be, it's around those debt forecasts.
Keeping
terms
them dynamic and live and real.
Yes, yeah. I think that is a really, timely, as accurate as they can, debt forecasts coming through to the Finance and Treasury team and being tabled within our monthly Treasury meetings is real gold to us in terms of having comfort around making those medium to long Treasury decisions.
Look, thanks very, very much. I'm really sorry that we do now have to cut off. Very much appreciate the time that you folk have taken to give us a really clear and outline of the importance of this part of the finance team being Treasury and Treasury risk management, just how strategic and how impacting it is when council's thinking about budgets, thinking about managing surpluses or deficits, as the case might be, and just how material this is to the sector. Thank you very, very much, Brett, and to Raj. We'll take this opportunity to now. We've already actually had a.
Thank you, Stu. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, Brett.
Bye.
Thanks, Raj.
Thanks, Bevan.
So just moving on, I believe I can actually move straight on now because we've actually dealt with the report. The next item on our agenda is the 7.3, that is the insurance policy report for 2024-25. I know that Bevan, you might like to please introduce our guests, Aon, and it's good to see you folks again. I have the pleasure of being able to have your presentations at other councils, and this is going to be an area that's very much topical at the moment, and I'm sure that we've got members of the committee that will have a number of questions. Bevan.
Thank you. Let's come up to the front. I'll get Julie to introduce the team. I haven't caught it. It's Matthew, eh? Yes. Yes, I remember Matthew, and I'm not too sure I've met the other gentleman yet.
Andrew.
Hi, Andrew. Over to you, Julie. Thank you.
Thanks so much to Aon for coming through just to... I know councillors have had a lot of questions about policies and coverage and where our exposures are, so we decided it would be a good idea for Aon to come in and explain some of our policies and what we're covered for, what we're not covered for. I have done a summary paper in here which just basically tells you what kind of premiums we pay a year, what kind of declared values we have, and what the increases are on each of those. But Matthew and Andrew will be able to help with giving us a more broad picture of what the market looks like. So.
Is the presentation of it?
Yeah, I think we're just trying to get it up.
Good morning, everybody. Just whilst the presentation... there we go. So just by way of brief introduction, my name is Matthew Wilson. Thank you. My name is Matthew Wilson. I am the head of Aon's Local Government Risk Practice Group. Aon is very well represented in the local authority sector. Some of the comments that I will make today are sector specific. They are not necessarily you specific. So I'll come on to a couple of those. And we will give an overview of where the current market is, what we see as considerations moving forwards. Andrew is here with me. Andrew Carlson works in the Hampton office with me, and he's the day-to-day service person for the council and has been doing so for a long time. So we do have a quick presentation to go through. I'm happy to take questions however you want to do that, whether that's as we go along or save them to the end. So without further ado,
I can get it to work. We're going to have one of those. Okay, right. So what we'll talk about really quickly. Current market. We'll give an overview of your current programme. There's a discussion around risk appetite and loss limits, although it goes into a few other bits and pieces for you. And also we'll cover off some of what we see as the emerging risks in the local authority sector. So a quick market update. Excuse me. We have been in a hard insurance market since about 2017. And what we mean by hard insurance market is insurer rating has increased, insurer terms and conditions have got more restrictive. It's just been a hard place. So you will have seen increases in premiums year on year since about 2017. I have, for once, got some good news for you. We are entering into a soft market cycle. And what that means is insurance rates will start to go down. This is basic supply and demand. There are other driving factors, but it's basic supply and demand. The insurance market always has been cyclical, and we are now entering into one of those soft market phases. It has moved very rapidly. Back end of Q4 last year, if you were to ask us, we would have said it's probably going to be a flat market. Certain policy classes have moved very quickly over the last couple of months, especially the London market and some of the Australian and Singapore markets, and we're now starting to see that happen in New Zealand. So, as I say, for once I can come to you with some good news, because previously it's all been, everything's gone up by 10%. Now, that doesn't mean to say that we shouldn't focus on exposures, what you can do in that space and how you refine an insurance programme. What's driving this? Well, what's driving it, and as the person presenting previously said, this is a very heavy slide. I'm not going to go into all the information within there, but basically it's global reinsurance markets. Insurers insure, if you think of it that way, as reinsurance is bought for insurers. The reinsurance market, again, is easing. That means that insurers' reinsurance costs are reducing, which means there's more capacity available in the market, and we are able to get the very best pricing for you. Now, one of the questions that I did this presentation yesterday at Gisborne, one of the questions we got asked then is, well, what about global events, wildfires, flooding, etc., etc.? Yes, they do still have an impact, but touch wood, New Zealand has had a relatively benign period, and a lot of the markets that we specifically use in London, and they provide covers for you on a couple of the placements, they are not exposed to big US losses. That's a strategic decision. So we still have to be mindful of the large-scale weather events, cyclones, floods, but the outlook for the coming 12 months is a very positive outlook because of that market segregation that we've established. There is one caveat to this, I'm afraid. I will talk about it separately. Your liability insurances are still difficult in the local authority sector. That is not a whakatane comment, that is a local authority sector comment, and I will touch on a couple of those points.
Through the chair. Excuse me, Stuart, can I ask a question?
Oh, I was just reading some notes.
Good morning, gentlemen. Hi, Julie. If you just go back to that previous slide, I'm just probably going to do devil's advocate. So how much profit does insurance companies have to make? Because last year your revenue grew 17%. And it's great that it's softening now, but I think that's just not a local government question, it's probably just a generic question.
Through you, Mr. Chair. It's a very good question, and it's one that from the broking side of the fence we are pushing with the insurers as well. The comments that we can make are most New Zealand insurers in the commercial sector, so we're not talking about sort of domestic residential, in the commercial sector, they have all been given growth targets this year. And when they get growth targets, what you then get into is that supply and demand conversation whereby they are looking to grow their books of business. So our role in this is to get you the best deals in that process. I can't answer your question directly as to how much profit is required from them, but what I can tell you is the directive for most commercial or corporate New Zealand insurers is they have growth targets this year.
It's just a conundrum that banks and insurance companies' growth and revenue seems to increase. All of our interest rates and all of our insurances continue to increase, and there just seems to be a huge disconnect. But that's a bigger conversation. And your latest annual report's not up, by the way.
This again is just a very quick summary. Now this is Q4, this is the end of Q4, and what it talks about here is the market dynamics, and also what we're seeing in terms of pricing trends. That is already out of date in a positive way. So if you look at the top box there, we are seeing that overall the market in New Zealand was moderate at the end of Q4. The market is now moderate to soft. Pricing, we are seeing some renewals coming through in the corporate space with sort of minus 10% on rates currently. There is lots of capacity. Underwriters are still focused on what they're doing. It's got to be good quality business. But as you can see there, the other lines, so that the casualty liability, that's the one we have to park for local authorities. That's a separate conversation. But such things as cyber, motor and property, they're all becoming moderate to soft. And that is, again, as I say, it's effectively a supply and demand issue. Insurers have growth targets. A quick summary of your overall programme. Again, there's a lot of information on here. If you look at that, there's basically 3 or 4 main policies which cause the derive the highest amount of premium spend that you have. At the top, we have your commercial material damage and business interruption policy. That policy provides cover for what we refer to as your above ground assets, so your buildings and contents, plant, etc. The next policy down is the infrastructure cover policy. That is basically providing protection for your reticulation network, 3 waters. I'm not going to get into a 3 waters conversation right now, but that policy there is largely done out of London. The other 2 that we need to talk about and sort of focus on, or the other 3, the one that stands out is your professional indemnity, $218,000. I will cover off some of the stuff around professional indemnity with local authorities shortly. The programme that you have is not unusual. It's a typical council programme. We have done work with the team over the years to try and refine some of this. Just because of the market is changing, we shouldn't take our eye off of that. We need to look at refining it further. But that is, as I say, just a summary. The liabilities, this is as good a time as any to talk about liabilities. Probably, and Andrew deals with our liability claims for councils, probably about 70% of the claims that we see in the local authority sector are derived from building consenting issues, Building Act related issues, whether that's an incorrect consent being issued or something not followed up in the process. We've had a number of high profile ones of those over the years. The insurance providers are still wary of that. It does appear to be getting better. We're seeing it slowing down. I think some councils have potentially improved processes or ways that they're doing these things, but it is still an issue within the space. Unfortunately, local authorities are deemed of being always responsible, irrespective of whether you are or not, and that you have a bottomless pit of money. So it's always council's fault. Within New Zealand, we don't have, the New Zealand legal framework is such that even if you're only 10% responsible and there's nobody else around, the builders have gone, the consenting people have gone, you can still end up with 100% of the bill. That is not the case in other countries throughout the world. So that's a bigger New Zealand issue, that's not just a council issue.
Oh, sorry, Matthew, just before you change that slide, if I could please ask you, of these policies, what are the most common ones that are currently being self-insured? by the sector?
A lot of councils don't buy cyber. Instead of spending money on the premium, they may invest in security systems and processes. That conversation was driven from where the cyber market was at about 3 years ago, where it was really expensive insurance. The cyber market now has, as you, from the last slide, has actually done a sort of 180-degree position. It's now a very soft market. So it is eminently more insurable now than it was. Yeah. Outside of the core liability programs, and when I say that, I'm talking about the professional indemnity, public liability, the general liability, statutory and employers' liability. The others, they tend to be council specific in terms of, do you have standing timber? Do you have a forestry block that you need to insure? Do you have a aviation hull, a drone or a aerial vehicle, a boat, etc.? There's not many they're not doing, but what some councils are doing is looking at the deductible levels that they currently have to see if that can be a positive impact on the pricing. And that's the next slide that we'll discuss.
Thank you. Yes.
Just following on from that, just about the cyber security. So on our table in our report, that one's gone up 19%. So after the marine, that is our next biggest increase. It's not on that slide, it's on our one that we have. And so when you're saying cyber insurance or liability is softening, do you mean that you can get more insurance for it? But the cost of a cyber breach could be catastrophic for an organisation this size. So will the softening mean that those premiums will continue to rise, as will your excesses?
No, through the chair, forgive me for protocol mistakes sometimes. The cyber market, the thing that drove the cyber market to be what we would class as a hard market is you couldn't get a quotation unless you had minimum levels of security in place. Once you've got those minimum levels of security and management processes in place, then the insurance was available. That, again, is a market which has changed in the last quarter, basically. So it is more readily available. And yes, as you can see there, the limit of indemnity you've got there is about $1.5 million. The impacts can be quite dramatic to an organisation. But the premiums, my expectation on premiums for that is they will be flat, if not slightly down, when we get to November next renewal.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Can you just explain that column, the third column, loss limit over LOI?
Sure. So under your material damage policies, so if we talk about the top one there, material damage, business interruption, and the infrastructure cover, you buy the material damage program in collaboration with other BOPLAS councils, and that is a very good thing to do because that has a very positive impact on your pricing. There's economies of scale. It's just a good thing to do. The overall program limit for that policy is $900 million. There was some high-level loss modelling commissioned a couple of years ago now, I think. And for the region, we're looking at what would a sort of a 1 in 1,000 year event cause to the region, and those numbers were about $900 million. So rather than buy, because collectively the BOPLAS group of councils probably have somewhere in the region of it's about 4 billion, isn't it?
I think it's about 4.7 billion.
They have $4.7 billion worth of assets. There's no need to buy insurance for $4.7 billion worth of assets, because if the Bay of Plenty region lost $4.7 billion worth of assets in one event, we're not here anymore. So we tend to look at buying the required amount of capacity. Loss modelling is undertaken. What are the numbers within that? So that's why there's a limit on that placement. We only buy that much capacity from the markets. The infrastructure piece, which is the next one down, similar approach. Again, there's billions of dollars worth of assets declared, but we only buy $500 million worth of cover, because if we have an event that's going to cause that much damage, there's a big problem. It's a New Zealand problem as opposed to a Bay of Plenty problem. Loss modelling has just been commissioned for that infrastructure program. So those numbers are being re-looked at. What has happened over the last 3 years, we've had this horrible double whammy of inflationary increases. Everything's gone up. The insurance market was hardening, so your premiums were going up. There's also been something, and I'm not an expert on this, I have to preface that, called the New Zealand Seismic Hazard Model, has recently been re-updated. This is a GNS piece of work. They've gone through New Zealand and got a better understanding of the effects of ground shaking and peak ground velocity and acceleration. It has changed the perception of some areas as to how bad the damage may be. So the modelling that we have just been commissioned to do takes into account that new seismic standard. That will be completed in time for the renewal, so we will be able to assess whether those numbers are still appropriate or whether they need to be re-looked at.
So for the Christchurch earthquake, for example, was all of that loss modelling, did it hold true, or were there people that ended up out of pocket because insurance companies couldn't or wouldn't pay? I wasn't here at the time, so I'm not sure. But
no, and I wasn't involved in it directly. There were some issues, I am sure, probably largely derived from adequate values. That's the other component to this, so that's the inflationary pressures. But what we have done is we've sort of tried to refine this so that the amount of insurance you buy is appropriate to the exposure you have. This isn't about getting you to buy more and more insurance. It's not how we want to make sure that you're getting the right levels. Okay,
thanks.
Thank you. Just going on about the seismic activity reports that insurance companies will be referring to, whether it's a household or commercial. So we're just installing a flood wall to protect CBD. We own 200 assets through the CBD. So because we're taking a mitigation and a reduction in our risk, will that be reflective in premiums going forward?
we ask for any information available about mitigation. I've got a slide that will come on to that, if I may. I'm just conscious of time.
Thank you.
Oh, there's a question.
Look, I've just got a question from Petra. Petra, please feel free.
Thank you, Stuart. If we could just go back to the last slide briefly, just two quick questions. One, a slightly technical question about the professional indemnity policy. That $15 million limit of indemnity, is that any one claim or are there limited reinstatements on that?
That is $15 million in the annual aggregate. I do have a slide which covers off a point in relation to that as well. The excess layer liability that we have in place of 145 million, which sits above that, that excess layer is shared between 37 councils. Those 37 councils exclude Auckland and Wellington. So it is largely provincial councils, Hampton City Council. I have not... the primary layer is yours and yours alone, but that 145 is a shared limit. It's a cost-effective way of buying a greater level of capital.
Okay, thank you very much. And then just one other very quick question on this. The cyber liability limit of 1.5 million, are you comfortable that's okay for a council of this size?
At the time, that was what we could get from the insurers, because it was in that hard market cycle. Again, as part of what we will be doing with the renewal process is reviewing with council as to whether that needs to be looked at, changed, and that's an internal conversation we will have with Julie and others around that.
Cool. Lovely. Thank you very much.
So of this $2 million in insurance, 2.3 that we pay out every year, historically, how much of that have we ever claimed, say over the 10-year period?
I couldn't tell you the claims numbers, but I understand the question.
Yeah, well, the question is, yeah.
Yeah, and again, I have another slide that will come on to that will hopefully frame some of that conversation for you. I'm mindful of time. So look, this is just a quick summary of the current excesses that apply, and that it leads into your question that was just asked. Part of the work that we will do with the team here especially as we're now into a soft market, is do we look at increasing those deductible levels? Historically, when we have looked at that, we have not received sufficient, we've not been able to get sufficient relief in premium to make it worthwhile. But depending on what council's risk appetite and risk tolerance is in the market now, we will be driving those conversations with the underwriters because it's a soft market. And if you, to your point, if we go back, look 5 years, what have we actually claimed? Does council have tolerance or appetite to, say, increase that to $500,000? I'm just picking a random number. Then will that flow on to premium savings? So it's changing that narrative slightly. These are just your just other deductible levels. I won't go through all of these because I think the important part of what we probably want to have a conversation about is this, is risk appetite, given the time. This is something Aon do called the Global Risk Management Survey. These are the top 12 risks that are identified at the end of 2023 by public sector organisations throughout the world. It's not very clear to see. Some of those are darker grey, some of those are lighter grey. You can't insure all of those. Insurance is one part of a risk transfer process or a risk management process. We can insure cyber attacks, data breaches, but we can't insure failure to attract or retain top talent. We can't insure political risk as such, but we can look at supply chain or distribution failures from an insurance perspective. We put those up there to show you that council, as I'm sure you're well aware, has a wide variety of risks that you are exposed to. And what we're looking at from an insurance perspective is where do you want to spend the dollar that you have on insurance to transfer the risk to get the best value for money. This is a messy slide, and I made a note whilst the other gentleman was speaking, and not that I understand interest rate swaps, but debt funding. Very broad brush, and this is a messy slide, but very broad brush of all the risks that council face. You can probably buy insurance for about 30% of them. You face risks within the organisation, and this is sort of modelled off of what happened with Cyclone Gabriel. For example, we don't insure roads. Now, I know you get funding from central government, but we don't insure roads, and historically have not been able to. So that is a cost to yourselves. Land is not insured. So you have a number of landslips come through. It means you have to spend a lot of money reprofiling something or putting a pipe in a different direction. We can't insure that. Well, to an extent, you can insure the talent that you may have to have, but we can't insure sort of workforce shortages. Can't really insure reputational brand damage. So very high level, about 70% of the things that could happen are probably uninsurable. Now, this feeds into that debt funding thing. Cyclone Gabriel came through, caused a lot of damage to a lot of councils. Councils have made claims against them at their appropriate policies, but they're still left with a shortfall somewhere else for the other activities that they've got to fund. So this is where we're suggesting we look at this sort of holistically, and insurance is just a component of how you fund that exposure or those costs that you incur. And we will talk to the team about this as we move forward. There are some very clever alternative risk transfer mechanisms that can be used in the insurance market. They may not suit local authorities, but my question would be, do you have a really good handle on this from events that have happened and have been experienced? And that is a question I ask every single council, and it's conversations we want to have about appreciating where you're going to get the best value for money from the dollar you spend on insurance, considering you have a limited pot of money to spend on these things when they happen.
So I'm going to throw that question to you, Steve. Have we got a good handle on this?
I don't think so. Look, I think that's a very difficult question for me because
And I
Sorry, I think-
apologise for that, but
I'll just say,
you
because it's live
are
stream.
the one that's on the spiky end here.
Yeah, and I think that's a very difficult question for me to answer today, 6 months into the job. In my previous role, no, that was in a different department largely, had a little bit of peripheral interest. But yeah, actually now I would say probably still learning and developing in terms of understanding that as a holistic picture. What I probably have is a reasonably good view on some very narrow lines in that holistic view, but probably not the entire picture, if I'm being honest.
May I add something to that?
Yes.
You're not alone.
Oh.
This is a conversation we have with corporate organisations as well as local authorities, and I think people are learning from the events that we've had over the last 7 years or so that there is a whole other conversation that needs to take place.
Yep. And I know rather unfairly, and I do apologise for this, Steve, is that, and your point is that this can fall within the cracks of an organisation, which is why it's really important that an organisation has that point of continuity and overview. Now, I like to think that this committee can become a part of that, but more on a strategic level. These are all the sum of the parts of the granular, and that's where this dovetails to this conversation that we had earlier today about the enterprise risk register, about risk appetite. It's been really fortuitous because the two presentations that we've had and we're having at the moment are dovetailing into this really nicely. And Steve, I didn't intend to put you on the spike. In fact, if you'd have said to me you were all over it, I'd have been absolutely gobsmacked. But thank you. We'll carry on with that. But I think it's a really, really good point to make.
And just from that, this is the last slide, I believe. How do we do it? What are the options that are open to organisations, accepting that insurance is only one component and we have to get the insurance piece right, obviously that's what we're here for, but is there alternative risk financing options? As I said, I was listening to a bit of the previous presentation about debt funding, etc., debt headroom, risk funding. Are there other ways you can finance this? Because let's be frank, if you buy an insurance premium, that money's gone, it's dead. Whether you make a claim on it or not, it's disappeared. So do we have conversations about, well, okay, for certain things, we change the structure, or we go to a higher deductible, or we do something different in terms of capacity on placements, and these are all the conversations we will have leading up to November. Risk management and risk maturity is a key point. I think a lot of local authorities, if I'm brutally honest, have some work to do in that space to understand what the impacts of some of these things are. We are all learning constantly. The point that that was made about investment in assets and resilience. What are you doing in that space? Does the new flood wall create a better environment for other properties that are exposed potentially? So these are things we will ask of you. Are you getting out of activities that you may have historically done in the past that you're not doing now, which might frame what things look like moving forwards? I mean, obviously the elephant in the room, as it were, is the whole Three Waters piece at the moment, and where that's going to go and what is that going to look like in the future. But that's a high-level view to stuff. We then have to drill down into the individual components of it, but that's the work that we will do with the team leading up to the next renewal.
Well, just getting back to my question about what this is costing and what we actually get out of it over time, because I bumped into a doctor the other day and he's insured himself in terms of health insurance. He says, why should I pay an insurance company? I'll just put the money in the bank. I mean, an extreme view, say I could put $2 million in the bank every year and invest it. Is anybody mad enough to do that? Or is it, I mean, you're insuring yourself. I mean, people do it on an individual level. I'm just not sure if anyone does it on a...
Yep. But perhaps not to your direct question, but what are some of the options open to you? And again, this is not a you statement. This is just what we have seen some others do. Do do you self-insure up to a very high level? Do you have a pot of money that you potentially can put aside to cover the attritional losses as opposed to the catastrophe losses? That $2 million, yes, it's a lot of money to spend, but if we had a major event and we go asking the insurance companies to pay out $120 million, at that point it's a relatively good investment. That's not the right word, but you understand what I'm saying. It's about that appetite. It comes down to what is the appetite within the organisation and what are the alternative methods of financing some of those attritional losses, and is there sufficient premium relief to make that worthwhile in the process? The problem that I've seen people say, yes, we'll put a fund of $5 million aside. We've got some money, we'll put a fund of $5 million aside. And in the first 12 months, they have a $6 million loss. So that fund's gone, and then they've got to reseed the fund to carry on at the levels. So it's the multiple events that may happen as well. I'll skip this for time, okay? So that's it.
Could I just ask a question back to the professional indemnity? And I think you were going to tell us why that premium is actually so high in the sector.
Yep.
Please.
Yep. As I said, most of the claims that we see in the local authority space are from building consenting. It's public knowledge, I can talk about it. So who remembers the Bella Vista housing development in Tauranga?
Yeah.
Yep. The insurance settlement on that was around about $13 million, I think, around about that number. That was largely I think it's fair to say, a process or a consenting issue. There were other factors to it, but council ended up with the bill. There has recently been a hospital in Carterton, I think it is, where there's been consenting issues in the building. That's a significant potential claim. There's about half a dozen of them that we've seen over the years. The problem with the previous insurances that have been in place, not through us, but historically that program has been underpriced. And I'm going back 10 or 15 years.
Yeah.
It's been underpriced. And back in the risk pool days, when risk pool existed and did those programs, there was a mutual fund type arrangement. The world has moved on from that. New Zealand is becoming more and more litigious. You will be aware of other cases that are happening at the moment. It goes back to that local authorities are always responsible and have got a bottomless pit of money. The pricing on that program with the insurers that we use now is about where it should be. They've committed to a long-term sustainable position on that, but they've had to get it to that sort of level. We probably see, from across those 30-odd councils, we probably see 10 or 15 claims a year around about the $250,000 mark for smaller building consenting claims, plus a couple of bigger outliers that come into play as well. For it to be sustainable, we do need to be looking at premiums at that level. And that's, I'm afraid, where we are at. Over the last 7 or 8 years, we have had numerous lead insurers on that program who walked on that program at some point. So it's just a difficult space.
Just, have we had a claim?
I'm going to look to Andrew. We've had a couple of notifications come through, haven't we?
We have a number of notifications of possible potential claims.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Leslie.
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions. The first one is back to cyber liability. So this is like the number one issue and risk for organisations, and so there's going to be some adjustment to what we pay and what the recovery might be. What would constitute a breach in cybersecurity from like a staff member or an elected member? Like, I'm just trying to think, we do all these little courses, to try and
Yes.
upskill ourselves.
Yep.
But if there was an invasion or a security breach, are we covered for that sort of thing? Are we talking about something that's big?
There's a range of items that are provided cover for under the cyber policy. So you have that the down costs, the cost of reinstating systems and those sort of things. There was one recently that an internet provider or an internet service provider notified, I think, a number of councils that they suspected there was going to be a breach, and it would be a denial of service type issue, so you were going to get inundated with spam and all of that sort of stuff, which meant you wouldn't be able to carry on potentially some of your functions. The big one is the ransomware.
Yeah.
Somebody gets into the system, takes all your records away from you, and then says, if you give us a check for X, we will let you have everything back. And we've seen a few of those happen.
But if they came in via someone's phone or device because they hadn't done any of the cyber training, have we failed to take precaution?
No, I don't think it's a prerequisite, but what the insurers do ask for is they want to make sure that you have, as an organisation, in place a certain number of security protocols, such as multi-factor or identification, regular maintenance and backup, end-of-life programs. You know, you get an old piece of software that you're decommissioning, that sort of stuff. I can get some more detailed information through to you if you wish.
That'd be useful, thanks. My other question relates to us living in a risky area or region. And so we had the Matata debris flow, and, you know, council and insurance companies allowed them to go back and rebuild there, but not be covered for another debris flow. They'd be covered for earthquake, they'd be covered for fire. And you alluded to it in your opening sort of statements about the type of risk that you are going to be able to be insured for or not. And I'm just thinking about the council owns a lot of property and assets. And when you think about your house, because of the seismic and risk maps now that regional councils are doing, basically our QV will go down and our premiums are going to continue to go up because we're in a riskier designated area. So I'm just thinking, are we trending towards people trying to self-manage themselves out of places where they live?
Sorry, through you, Mr. Chair. Are you referring to domestic homeowners facing the fact that their QV values are going down?
Oh, yeah,
and
sorry,
your
I switched
individual?
out to
Yep,
the-
no, and that's fine. Climate change. Where we build in New Zealand, and I'm probably getting slightly out of my area of expertise here, so let me have some latitude on that. Where people have historically built, is that going to be brought into question? And that's a function of council. That's a function of allowing where people will be able to build in the future. At what height do properties need to be built at? The insurance industry, in broad brush terms, has signalled that it wants that to be better managed. There are parts of New Zealand where you can't buy flood cover at the moment, or if you can, it's very, very expensive. And that loops back to the liability question, your consenting process. If people are being allowed to consent and build in certain areas that you know are going to have a problem, but you are not taking adequate steps in that process to try and obviate some of those problems in and around the building design or whatever it may be, are those people going to come back to you in 5 years' time and say that's your fault as a council? So that's the understanding of those exposures, again.
Would our liability risk cover us with that?
Potentially, yes.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I've got lots of insurance questions. I'll finish.
No, this is what it's for. Yes, Ben.
Local government set up a thing called the Local Government Funding Agency, right, of which we're all members. And we're buying our insurance in pools off private insurance companies. So is it viable to think of doing the same thing with insurance as what we do with lending? Like set up a council-owned insurance business? Is that I mean,
That happened and it didn't do a very good job.
oh, did it?
I'm afraid
Okay.
they've had a go at it.
Oh, did they? Okay, I don't know.
Well, that's for another chat.
Okay, all right, fair enough. Yep.
I was wondering, yes. Oh, sorry too, I didn't see your hand. Please, your question.
I'm fine.
Oh, you're fine. Could we go back to the slide, it's the one with the breakdown of the policies and the excess, if we could put that up. I guess I've got just a couple of broad questions. One is, and this is kind of in your capacity, you're seeing a lot of councils. You see a lot of, we're a reasonably homogenous bunch.
Yes.
Yes, we've got some geographical quirks and other things, but on the whole, we're in terms of your step back and looking at our cover, our policy, is there anything there that to you intuitively you think you might change that? You might think about it. It might be a conversation that we have to have. But is there anything that you would step back for Whakatane District Council and say, this is good, but my instincts suggest in terms of what you're feeling is the potential train coming or the way the wind's blowing, or whichever analogy we like to think. And I mean, you've given us an update on the cyber and the fact that that's just been, I mean, look, 3 years ago we were talking about cyber, and it was the discussion around the table was you can't insure it, folks. Now we can, and I'd just be very interested in your guidance on that.
If, and again, please don't take this the wrong way, if I was having a conversation with a large corporate entity, the minimum deductible levels on certainly the material damage policy would probably be somewhere in the region of $1 million. Historically, councils have actually quite a high risk tolerance because of the various funding mechanisms that are available to you, but have a historically conservative with a small c risk appetite. So up until recently, we have seen councils having material damage programs with a $10,000 deductible on there and claiming for a $15,000 asset, where you get $5,000 from the insurers. I think that would be the real obvious one, first of all. Excuse me, the real obvious one, first of all, is align some of those deductible levels with a realistic risk appetite and risk tolerance. Now, are you going to see huge, great premium savings? You will see some savings, yes. I'm sure they won't mind me saying this. Whanganui District Council went through this exercise last year. And they elected to go for quite a high deductible level. And they saved themselves, I don't really want to talk about the number, but let's just say it was a significant number on their insurance program.
In the hundreds of thousands.
In the hundreds of thousands.
Yes.
Yeah. It took them a while because they went through it properly. They had a look at their asset base. They worked out what they really didn't need to insure, what was going to be disposed of in the next 3 years, let's say. They did a really good job. It took a while, and it was absolutely something that had to be done from both ends. It was done from a sort of asset owner base, but also from a strategic leadership team and governance base. The conversations had to go both ways, and they got a resolution. That would be my number one suggestion. If I stepped back and looked at it, that would be the number one thing, is more scrutiny on what is on the material damage policy, and what are your excess levels.
Thank you, that's really great. And could I just ask management that in the discussions that we've had earlier today, about the way that we'll be workshopping enterprise risk granular, looking at, importantly, the risk appetite of council, and we're going to be doing that in the new trimester, that it folds into that workshop. This is just going to be another lovely little lead-in to that particular risk, that we'll be able to have some conversation amongst councillors in terms of that. It's about risk appetite. And what I'm hearing here is a really, really good, it's a very solid and I would feel, given that the numbers which we're talking about, which hit our bottom line as OPEX, is probably a really good one as part of that workshop. That would be really great. I had one other, and this one's an awkward question. It's about the state of the New Zealand insurance sector, and in particular for councils, in that we seem to have a very small group of insurers that we can go to, and that there's been an ever-shrinking subgroup of underwriters. And the sum of the parts, it could indicate that it's not a particularly transparent and competitive sector. Would that be a reasonable assumption?
Can I answer that question in a slightly different way?
You can answer it however you wish.
One of our strategies for this year's renewal is to engage with other offshore markets for a range of your policies, not just necessarily the infrastructure placement. I hope that answers the question.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
That's really helpful.
Okay.
Are there? Yes, Bevan.
Just one question, Matthew. With Whanganui going through their risk assessment and making some changes around deductibles, was that a process that was supported by Aon? And I'd be interested to understand if there's any guiding materials to support those conversations.
We did a workshop about how insurance fits into that overall risk framework and risk transfer framework. But to be fair, it was, I can see his face, I can't remember his name. I can get you in contact with him if you want. He drove the, Mike Firmer from Whanganui District Council. He drove the process with others. They did spend a lot of time talking to business unit managers about asset selection and those sort of things. We gave them some indications of what they would expect to receive by way of savings. We also looked at claims histories going back 10 years to see what they may or may not have incurred on different deductible levels, but absolutely can help you with that process. But
Right. Do we have any other questions? Look, thank you very much, Matthew. Really appreciate that, and do really appreciate your candour. We like to be able to sometimes ask the awkward questions, but it's great not to get too much obfuscation in return, and I appreciate it very much. And also appreciate you, Andrew, and we'll look at, I'll move that the Risk and Assurance Committee receives the Insurance Policy Report 2024-25. Do I have a seconder? Yes, thank you, Leslie. All those in favour? Thank you. Right, that's...
Thank you, Andrew. Thank
you,
Matthew.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
We've come to the end of the public section of the meeting. I'd like to...
I'll just make a comment. That was really useful for us. Thank you. But considering approximately 70% of our insurance claims are related to consenting, I'm looking forward to seeing how, David's here, so I see Steve's gone, how we can eliminate some of those, because I know there's some that just keep rolling on over a couple of years, but are we getting better at not having those consenting faux pas?
Faux pas. Well, I think probably the main point that perhaps didn't come out there was that over the last few years, we have started to operate as a BCA, Building Control Authority, and we are accredited each couple of years, which is testing both our processes and systems. And our officers have to meet certain competency levels as part of that as well. So they are continually being trained and audited against their relative competency, and that limits then the extent of building consents that can fall within their ambit based on their competency. So I think the whole system has changed quite a bit over the years. I mean, you'll see in the the confidential legal proceedings report, there are items that we know about that may come back and we need some action, but generally they are very low level matters. We're not seeing the big blowouts of work. In fact, our last accreditation process, our actual inspections on site and the like, we got a clear run. We didn't actually get any cars as a result of that. It was more systems and processes. So it's a continuous improvement process too.
Okay, so I'm just going to look at a resolution to exclude the public, move into public excluded. Do I have a mover and a second to that the public be excluded from the following parts of the proceedings of this meeting, namely 1, confirmation of Risk Assurance Committee public excluded minutes, 19 August 2024, 2, legal proceedings report, November 2024, and 3, Boat Harbour project update, November 2024. Thank you, two, seconder. Thank you, Leslie. Those in favour? Carried. Thank you. Now, Good afternoon, and back in public. I'm just going to restate the following resolutions from the public excluded meeting. One, and that was that the legal advice March 2025 report be received, and that two, that the Risk and Assurance Committee confirms that the public be excluded from consideration of this report on the grounds set out in the Local Government Official Information and Meetings Act 1987 and Section 48 1A1, Section 72G, as withholding the information is necessary to maintain legal professional privilege. Could I ask?
You just restate.
I'm not there yet. So we've finished this this meeting. I'll ask Councillor O'Brien to close our meeting with a karakia. Right, now folks, we're going to break